Hi, everybody. I am Poop Witch X, and I am joined today by the incredible Dalya Israel from WAVA. The executive director of WAVA is joining us today for an incredible episode of Coven Conversations. Welcome in, Dalya.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I want to ask you what your pronouns are before we start.
Yeah, thank you. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm actually joining today from the unceded and ancestral and occupied territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people.
I love that I talked to Charlene about this. I love that you guys always make note of what lands that you are currently on. I think that's incredible and amazing. And thank you for sharing that with us. I want to ask you right off the bat, how did you get started with WAVA?
Oh, well, I just celebrated my 17th anniversary here, but my time here predates my work, my paid work. I joined WAVA in 2002 when I was a college student. And I am a survivor, and I was on a quest to figure out what I needed. And what I needed was to be with community, to be honest. I was one of the fortunate people that was pretty clear that what happened to me wasn't my fault, but something needed healing. And it was really about being with like-minded people who were trying to change the world. And I've never left. I'm still here.
Wow. So you found WAVA through means of your own trauma that you went through. You sought out, and when you found them, what was that like? How did it help heal you? Because I feel like when survivors go, what is the first step that sort of helps that healing?
I think for me, I was at a local college here, and I was taking women's studies, which is now often called gender studies. And it was really my first opportunity to start looking at the systems that create kind of the conditions in our society that allow sexual violence to happen. And it was really the first time that I had the opportunity to sit and think about things that are often talked about as like just violence between two people, kind of be able to float up above that. And it just started to make so much sense, that it was so much bigger than me and my personal experience. And I found WAVA through courses that I was taking. And it was really particularly around the values that the organization held that had me come here to my kind of next, what I often refer to as like my next cliff jumping experience, because so many more doors became open in my education and how I started to understand the world differently. It was like either I could keep clinging on to, the reality that I had been raised with, or I needed to take this leap and kind of dive in completely. And so I think that's what I hope that we offer survivors here, is that invitation to curiosity around like who made the rules and who made what is considered to be quote unquote normal, or what we should expect in the world, and who gets to say like what that is and should be, right?
I love that. That's such an important thing, because I feel like so many people feel so alone, and they don't know what the new normal is, and they're now trying to find out what does that even mean to anybody? What is your normal is going to be different to somebody else's, and how do you get from a place where your previous normal has been changed, and now where do you go, and how does that conversation start? And I think that's absolutely incredible. And how long has WAVA been before? Because you've been a part of it for 17 years. How long has WAVA been established?
Yeah, so 1983 was when a group of women left another local rape crisis center to kind of seek out a different set of values and start this organization. And it basically was one woman that started our crisis line in the basement of her house, and it's grown to, who we are today. And we're about to celebrate our 40th we're going to be adulting in a very
is
real way next year.
40 is
Yeah.
incredible. 40 years of helping survivors is so tremendous. It's actually hard to even like process. So this came from a need. They felt like they needed to do something. So what differentiates WAVA from other crisis centers? Like, what's that special sauce that you guys are here for 40 years? That's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, BC was like a hotbed of feminist activism in the 80s. We got to be part of so many cool initiatives and things that really did change the course of the country around the criminal code and how the criminal code sees sexual violence. We got to participate in lots of changes when it comes to how survivors get to be heard in courtrooms. But I think and this might be a sentimental thing that I just feel like personally connected to with our Constitution, but I think what makes us really incredible is that we really do center a relational way of being. And we really believe that one of the ways of changing, not only bandaging up survivors, right, through our support services, but also focusing on changing the world is such an important thing, so that we're not just trying to band-aid people up and then send them out into the world that broke them in the first place, right?
Oh, yeah. It's so beautiful. So you want them to thrive even after they've been through WAVA's doors.
And we know that people do and can, right? Yeah. And that the world needs to change because there's a whole bunch of stuff that continues to contribute to those things. So I feel like our Constitution that the women in the 80s really had set out for us about changing systems both internally and externally continues today, and that we focus on really meeting survivors where they're at and hearing from them, because we really do believe that survivors are the experts of their own experiences and that they can tell us best what they need as far as support services go, that we're not coming in and swooping in and being the experts and telling them how to heal.
I just got the chills. I think that was so beautiful, because you're allowing the survivors to tell you, to vocalize their needs. And so much of survivors' stories get muddled and get taken away from them. Their voices are taken away. And you are saying, tell us how we can help you. And that's an amazing and impactful thing. I think that's incredible. So you've been with WAVA for 17 years. You have probably seen countless people come through and seen so many survival stories, and people survive, and not only survive, but thrive after. Do you have one that really resonates with you?
I have so many. Because most of my work here at WAVA was in the victim services program, I didn't have kind of the same confines as somebody who might be in counseling. So because court cases tend to go for a very long time, and people, if they're sentenced to custodial time, might be in jail for many years. So I've had the privilege of being alongside of some people for 9 years. Wow. And it's incredible. I think one of my favorite memories is a young woman who I worked with, who grew up in a very conservative community and household in another part of Canada. And she came here to go to school, and she grew up with a lot of kind of gender norms and rules about how to behave as a young woman. And she came here and went to school and had planned, a party. And one of the people in her class was interested in supporting her. And anyways, an assault happened. And for a long time, she internalized a lot of the blame of the assault, and felt that she had somehow done something to make that assault happen to her. And through the course of our work, getting her ready for court, she really was able to clarify the fact that actually nobody in this world should experience violence. There's nothing that we can do to expect violence enacted upon our bodies. And when she was sitting on the stand in court, high school students came into the courtroom and sat behind me. And oftentimes, because Canada's courts are open, oftentimes you have people coming to like witness, and sometimes grade 12 law students will come and watch. And so they sat in the corner. And just as they sat down, the defense lawyer started asking her about consent, saying, isn't consent kind of like asking your mom for her car keys and your mom says no, and then you walk away and come back and you say, hey, mom, can I get the car keys? And your mom's like, no. And you walk away and come back and you're like, hey, mom, can I get the car keys? And finally, she's like, yes. And my client, who, had so much internalized stuff for so long, looked this defense lawyer straight in the face and said, no. If I had a friend come to my house and tell me they wanted a sandwich and I made the sandwich and I offered it to them and they said no, I wouldn't shove it down their fucking throat.
Nice.
And it was the best moment.
Oh, wow.
And then these 3 young women from a high school class went up to her afterwards and were just like, you are so badass. Like, so badass. That was so incredible.
Oh,
and,
my God.
It was just like this affirming moment from community, and for her to find her voice and to just be so clear in her mind about what consent actually means. So I think that's probably
amazing. Oh, I got the chill. I'm getting chills so many times. I think that story not only is so beautiful and touching, but like, I commend that woman for doing it also in a forum like that when you're nervous and you have pressure on you. And it sounds like it was a long ongoing thing, and to just know, like, firmly and clearly, that is an amazing triumph. And so one of the things that you touched upon earlier is sort of the feeling that survivors have a lot of guilt, like they did something to deserve that. And so how, if anyone's listening, what advice would you give to sort of help like this woman who finally realized it was not her fault. There's nothing she could have done. No one deserves this. what is something that you would aid survivors in getting there in that thought process, that they didn't do anything to deserve that?
Yeah. So I often say to people, we should be able to run down the street like butt ass naked and not be afraid of any violence being enacted upon. It is, safety is not a finite resource. There is actually like a bazillion tons of safety around. What I often walk people through is to think about like a different situation, and we call it the safest person in the room situation. So I often ask people like, okay, think of your safest person and let's go to a party and fill your room with your safest person. Now, let there be a person who is wasted, who is dancing on a table and starting to take their clothes off. If that room is filled with the safest person, are you worried about this person that is dancing on the table? Right. Most people are like,
no.
Now, exchange that person for a room of randos. Are we worried about this person?
Yes.
And instantly people are like, yes. And so, the point is who's around you. The point is not your behavior. And so it's not actually you putting yourself at risk or you being vulnerable. It's about your surroundings targeting you or making you vulnerable because of their own behavior. And so I think for so long, because, sexuality has been up for debate and strongly tied to morality and all of these things, we tend to like miss the mark on whose responsibility it is to increase safety. And it's not ours. Like we have to be aware of our own actions, and we need to be aware that we're not going to cause harm, but we should absolutely not be culpable for our own safety or responsible for ensuring that nothing bad happens to us, because it's a myth.
Right.
It's a myth.
And how and so why is it, in your opinion, because I feel like you've been here for 17 years watching this all unfold, watching the world sort of changing, and I do think the conversation has become more prevalent, right?
Yeah.
Why is victim blaming? Why is it that or what they were wearing, what they were doing, why is that still such a tether people tie to the victims? Why do you think that's still a narrative that exists in 2022? It's hard, right? It's a hard one.
There's many different things. I think that as long as we have patriarchy, as long as people feel entitled to other people's bodies, there's going to be a sense that a person who has caused harm has only been after their own needs, right? And so if we don't care about each other and see each other as fully human, then we're going to use all kinds of tactics to blame somebody else for behavior that we don't want to be accountable for or take responsibility for, right? Yeah. And that's a problem.
Right. Huge problem. And I feel like the fundamentals of that problem are so deeply rooted in our society that until we rip it out from the root, it's just going to the weeds will keep growing. It needs to get down to the basic of it. And I think that's why this conversation is so important, because if we can, as a society, get to this root source that says, why do you feel like you're entitled to anyone's bodies? What is that feeling from? Is that from years of you and as you said, the patriarchy being entitled to everything and anything and not really having repercussions because of that? Where does that conversation start to flip so that we do help those that are more susceptible to dangerous acts upon them?
Yeah.
Whatever that might mean.
And I think for Canada and the US or Turtle Island, we cannot ignore the way that these lands were conquered, right? Through imperialism, chattel slavery in the US and Canada, through colonialism and the erasure of Indigenous people. All of these things were brought here to these lands with intention to dominate and to dehumanize people. And so, we have militaries, right? All of the foundations of how these lands were conquered is so deeply rooted in the practices that continue sexual violence. So yeah, I think your point about there's so many branches, and if we keep going after branches, we're never gonna, resolve the conditions, right? Yeah. It's fertile ground.
Right. It all started because you're absolutely right. It's the branches are sort of the secondary virus, the symptoms, if you will, but the virus itself is all the way rooted in how these lands were taken. And I think once you start to allow yourself to think about that for a long time and think about all the things that stem from that, all the different iterations of violence and hatred and racism and bigotry and sexism, it's all rooted in that belief that I am owed this, I took this, it's mine, from force.
Yeah.
And nothing necessarily bad happened to those people who took all those things with force. Only the victims of those things. And they're still reaping the benefits of those things. So it's absolutely a very deeply rooted issue, and not just as in America, but you guys are in Canada. It's a fundamental issue.
Absolutely.
Big issue.
The system. So not only the people have gained wealth and resource and all of those positions of power through that process, but also they built systems that continue to perpetuate people's access to justice and accountability, and whether they have access or not, right? In the US, we saw this with your previous president, who I shall not name, but public conversations, right, where people are just that person is never going to be held accountable, and is altering the justice system that could potentially hold people who have caused harm accountable, right? And so I think I think where we're at is like, how do we regain ground in communities and give power back to communities to be able to ask for accountability and try to deal with those root issues with each other, right? Because that's really
absolutely.
what I've witnessed over my time is like survivors are grieving, and they want somebody to be accountable for what they've done.
Right. So what would you say to, I feel like I don't want to speak for anyone, but many of us had people tell them something has happened to them. And you become that confidant, that person who, and I've had this happen, unfortunately, so many times, especially in college, where something just doesn't sit right, and maybe they were, drunk or whatever, and they know something was wrong. They know that a boundary was crossed, either in a smaller fashion or in a very big fashion. They come to you as that person. Well, how would you give advice if you're that confidant with someone who survived something? What advice would you give to help that survivor best, get help?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's two things about this. One is that if somebody has come to you, like a huge point of kudos to you, because, people are always listening and watching, right? Mm-hmm. We listen to whether people are safe by the way that they talk about sexual violence, whether they're, being misogynist or transphobic or homophobic. Like, people are always listening. So if you've been chosen as a safe person, first of all, like, recognize just how incredible that is.
Never thought about that like that before. And it's something that I think that you're right. I mean, people are always watching. So
yes.
Yeah, it's important. Okay.
And then I think the second thing is just like, don't be scared. Disclosures, we get disclosure language from like legalese and this idea that the only response to sexual violence is like a law and order approach. And you know what? It's not. We've just been socialized to think that that's the thing, right? And so I think just like being heart-centered and hearing somebody and just saying like, shit, that's really hard, and like, I'm here, and what do you think you might need or want?
Right.
One of the things that we say here is that we support survivors to choose their own path to healing or justice, whatever that looks like. And so whether it's being an ear or whether it's going to the beach and like burning a letter together that you've written this person that's caused you harm, I mean, there's no cookie cutter approach, right? And so I think just being there, if somebody is wanting resources or needing resources, being somebody that might be able to do some research. WAVAW's crisis line is always available to brainstorm. We have incredible people that answer our line and can be super creative and think outside of the box with people. I think it's just like being there, and not feeling like you have all the answers for somebody or that you want to rescue them, but just being inside,
being present in them, and being that safe person you talked about at the very beginning. Like, you want to be the person who, when you fill the room with that energy, that you're safe and they'll come to you. So one of the other things that I know, and I hope that, again, like, I'm going to give like a trigger warning here, but let's say a person was a criminal act of sexual violence was done upon them, whether it be by a partner, a stranger. Would you, I think one of the major things that a lot of people will not know what to do, and they will potentially, do things that might be the opposite of what you would think that they would do, like immediately go to the police. You have to go to the police. Don't shower. Don't go. Like, that is probably the antithetical thing your brain is gonna, it's gonna be immediately you're gonna want to shower and clean yourself. Immediately you're gonna want to sort of almost move on or act out in some way. How would how would you approach someone like that? Again, just listening. Would you try to tell them, I'll accompany you? Like, where would that be for that situation?
So I always like to remind myself that an act of sexual violence takes away somebody's bodily autonomy or their
Right.
ownership over their bodies.
Right.
And so when we're thinking about responses, I think it's really important that we're thinking about how to care for a person to ensure that they're going to be able to feel a sense of autonomy or control
Mm-hmm.
over the process that's going to unfold for them.
Right.
And so, yeah, if people, it's different in Canada and the US, but
Mm-hmm.
here you don't need medical insurance. You don't need, we call them care cards here, which is basically just your insurance card.
Okay.
Um, you can go to the hospital, and where we are, it's a very health focused program. And you can store evidence for up to a year if you want to keep your kind of options open down the road. But I think the biggest thing is like giving people information and not
Right.
overwhelming them. So giving
Right.
them information verbally, in writing, if somebody accompanied a friend to a rape crisis center or a sexual assault center, then they could maybe follow up with an email to say, hey, listen, these are the notes that I took, and I wanted you to have them.
Mm-hmm.
Or I just want to remind you that, like, here are some options that were offered to you. Because our brains, like, we only have so much attention, right?
Yeah.
And when we're maybe more inward focused, then we might not be able to hold the information that's being shared with us.
Right.
And so that's, I think having a trusted person with you anytime you're going to talk to a system, whether it's the medical system or the criminal legal system, um, is just so important so that there's more ears in the room and
Right. And
more.
somebody too, when you might be a little bit overwhelmed, who's
Mhm.
that second set of ears to hear you, to collect the information, the pamphlets. But so if, let's say, take us through, somebody calls WAVA, who do they talk to? And then what are the procedures? Like, how would that transpire for, let's say, a domestic abuse situation?
So we really focus on sexual violence, and if somebody was calling here because they wanted support with domestic violence, we would do a potential intake for counseling. We could also refer them to other local organizations. If somebody had been sexually assaulted in their relationship and they were wanting to get medical attention, our crisis line, whoever was answering the crisis line, whether it was after hours or during hours, would be able to refer that person to our hospital accompaniment program.
Mm.
Um, and then kind of reporting options would be available after that. And we have support to go to see the police. We also have what's called a third party report, where you can file anonymous information to the police in British Columbia, where we are. Um, and that information is just held for profiling reasons. There's no actual investigation that happens, but for so many survivors, they feel like, I just don't want this to happen to somebody else, and I want to be
Right.
able to just share information. So that's a great option. And then again, like, it would really be up to that person to hear from them about what they're hoping for and what kind of supports they were looking for.
So there's different options for any call. You take it by by case basis. It's not a blanketed. And is that why you guys, not only have you been around for 40 years, but do you also think that one-on-one, more personalized, not here's all your options, we wish you well, is that one of the special things that you think are unique to WAVA?
I think so. I
Yeah.
think that we're really big on aligning our values with the way that we act with people and in the world. And, we acknowledge when we're wrong. We try to do better every day. And so, yeah, I think a huge part of it is just knowing that so many of the survivors that come to us are also coming to us through experiences of intergenerational trauma. That there just, like, isn't a cookie cutter approach. Everybody has such a, like, distinct experience
Right.
of how harm impacts them, that we wouldn't be able to meet people's needs if we just did it that way.
Which I also think that that's one of the things that people might fear when they call, like, who am I going to be talking to and how are they really going to help me? And I think it's important to denote that when you do call a rape crisis center like WAVA, you are getting a person. You're also not getting, going through the rigmarole of, trying to find someone and you're human, whatever. You have that personalized care, which I think is so important when you're in a moment of need, emotional, mental, physical, spiritual need, like the survivors are at that time. Where do you see the future for WAVA? Like where do you want the organization to go to?
So I think we're constantly thinking about how, as organizations, as part of kind of the nonprofit industrial complex, we've also been socialized to think about appropriate responses to sexual violence. And I think we've been really digging deep over the past 3 or 4 years to think about how do we not continue to respond out of a place of kind of where funders and where governments want us to go, but what does the community actually want? And so we've got some, really exciting things. We launched a Transformative Justice project that is actually going to walk 5 cases for survivors through a transformative justice process. We, I think, are thinking more creatively and expansively around what healing looks like. So for so many people, talk therapy doesn't actually work. And particularly for sexual violence, so much of it lives in our bodies in somatic ways. And so we launched Remembering Our Ancestors last year to really offer a different approach for healing for Indigenous survivors to be connecting back to culture and body. So there's some workshops around reclaiming your story, and we have a wicked Zoe Roy, who's a Indigenous spoken word artist and rapper that's come and done a whole bunch of stuff to support people to reclaim their stories. And another one of our alumni, Madeline McCallum, who dances traditional dance and has done her own healing through dance. And so, I think we're just thinking more expansively.
I love that.
And then, we're looking at medical systems and how we might be able to offer the community a place to get their medical needs met in different ways. And then there's the possibility of a name change coming soon.
To be decided. That, well, first of all, I think that also one of my favorite things that you brought up is that so much of survivors' stories live within their bodies, and it's talk therapy is also not a one shoe fits all, and it doesn't always fit at all. There are so many other things that might be a better release because it's something that happened to you physically. And actually, I read an article that said that like stretching certain areas can actually like elicit huge trauma responses of like, because you hold things in your body. So I love that you guys are focusing on that. I think that's amazing. And I wanted to sort of talk about also, because you bring up we talked about the root of the problem, right? About how the lands were taken and how Indigenous people still suffer, and how much of that is tethered with WAVA. It's amazing. Has it always been that way? Was that always a focus for WAVA? Because it's the root of all causes? Like, how did the two become so intertwined?
Yeah. So, I would say I can only speak for the time that I've been here that Indigenous leadership and centering ceremony has always been, at least over the past 15 or 16 years, a central part of our organizing. And we also just have the reality of so many missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people on these lands, like across Turtle Island. So, borders don't stop that. And I know that, that work is also happening in Mexico as well with Indigenous folks. And so, it is central to our movements, and it is so important that we are reckoning with that, particularly as settlers who have perhaps been uninvited here. we need to be looking at how we are, how we're making meaning of that, how we're showing up for Indigenous folks who are made vulnerable by society and who are being targeted by our white supremacist colonial society. The narrative gets changed that folks are putting themselves at risk or all of this other nonsense, and that's just not the case. We continue to set the conditions for people to be harmed.
I think it's so powerful. I think that I think what's beautiful about WAVA is that you are transcendent beyond just we're a rape crisis, center, and we'll help you. It's like you are trying to get to the root. You are trying to help on every facet of humanity. It's not just for women. It's not just for this one subset. You are open for all. And I think that's also really important. I know we're in Women's History Month, and I know that that's, a focus, but WAVA goes beyond just for women. It is for anybody, for everybody, and that you are trying to not just reach for the branches, right? You're going for the root, which is so important and so incredible. And I also wanted to ask you, so for just going forward, WAVA's doing Streaming for Survivors for this week. Absolutely incredible. Also, I want to ask, is this the first time you partner with Twitch streamers?
No, I feel like last year
was the first one?
Did. Yes.
Okay.
We had,
So this is the second year.
Yeah.
Is it going to become an annual thing that you'll do?
Yes, I believe so. And just like a huge thank you to you and your incredible community. I mean, it's like really, I was saying to Emily, like my mind is absolutely blown.
Right? And it's so funny because Emily and Shar and I would have these meetings and we would constantly not know what to expect. We wouldn't know what was happening. And then day one, like, what happened? Which is incredible. But so where do you see, how this conversation is becoming more and more prevalent, right, in society?
Yes.
And now we are raising money on Twitch, which is becoming even more part of the normalized conversation, which Twitch has so many issues with this. There's so many, but beyond that, how can we help continue this conversation in a way that's not triggering or upsetting? How can we continue this conversation so that we're helping survivors, not just through donations, but going forward and continuing helping in that way?
Yeah. I think it's interesting with the internet, I feel like it's moved so much quicker than we've been able to catch up to it.
So quick, yeah.
And so there's been so many times over the past, 10 years where people have experienced real harm in online spaces. And whether that's, images being shared of them without their consent or harassment that's happening online. I think we have to do the same things that we want to be doing in party scenes or in workplaces where we start to actually develop some really clear guidelines about like what's acceptable and what's not. And just recognizing that survivors are everywhere, right? And like I said before, we're always listening to like who are the safe people and who are the safe places. And so I think we have to be aware, whether it's triggering or not, just how it's impacting people witnessing and listening to behavior that's happening, right? And whether it's in a chat box or whether it's in a game. I remember years ago there were games around like raping people on trains and stuff, right? Like there's actually games being made like that. That's going to affect all of us who are in online spaces, right? So I think how we can support survivors in online communities is like showing up in ways that we feel are congruent with values that we want to be aligning with, and creating safer communities where we acknowledge that consent is important and that we acknowledge that language we're using or jokes that we're saying are going to impact people in very real ways.
Right. And do you feel like with, Twitch has so many, there are toxic communities on Twitch. It's an unfortunate reality. Do you feel like Twitch as a whole, like what could, as a Twitch streamer, obviously using my platform for good and doing and advocating for the marginalized voices and in any way that I can help. When going forward, do you feel like the best course of action is to just sort of like report things that you hear? Should we, message Twitch and say you need to change TOS? Because there are even partnered streamers who harass and do things like that. So how would you say in a digital space we should advocate for ourselves?
Yes, I think reporting to whoever has the power or influence to change people's behavior is important. But I also think having, like, similar to the conversations that you're going to be a part of on Friday, right?
Yes.
In the channel, I think
Yes.
having ground rules that communities can follow, knowing what's expected, changes the tide of what is considered quote unquote normal, right? People are flying into online spaces with all of the, I often refer to it as swimming in the soup because it kind of feels like that, right? Until
Right.
you can feel or see your surroundings, you're not quite sure like just
Right.
how much you've been impacted. But
Mm-hmm.
um yeah, I think just like creating the new set of norms that
I
we
love that.
want to hold up is an important thing. And I think there's been really cool music artists that have just said, like, at my shows, if
Mm-hmm.
y'all are groping people, like, you're going to be asked to leave, right? If
Right.
you're going to be speaking in ways that are rooted in misogyny or transphobia, like, you're going to be asked to go.
Right.
Uh, and that's the way that you start to change culture, is by just saying, like, this is the deal breaker, you know?
Clear boundaries, and that's very hard to set, especially in a digital space where you're not. I feel like a lot of the times when we are, and I'm starting the segue about what's happening on Friday because it's true, right? It's so hard when people are behind a computer, the ways that you feel like you are being harassed, or even like the boundaries of sexual conversations are blurred when you're not face to face,
Yeah.
because so many people wouldn't say or do the things that they do in person. They
Yeah.
wouldn't, but they feel safe and they have the safety behind the screen. And I think that safety behind the screen is unfortunately benefits again the perpetrator of the negative and not the victim, because when you are the victim, when someone is being a predator, they will find every loophole to get around banning and ban evasion and finding different ways to still get into contact with you. So I think that these conversations, like setting the new norm, what is the normal, and not backing down when you set that normal and people are trying to push that boundary, saying like, no, I don't need a reason to ban you. You're making me uncomfortable. That's enough.
Yeah.
And I think that conversation, which we're gonna have on Friday with our panelists, which I am so excited about. On Friday, we're gonna be doing a front page 1 hour panelist seminar about cultivating consent and safety in digital spaces. And I think this conversation is so imperative, especially for marginalized communities on Twitch, which women, people of color, LGBTQIA, we are still at a much larger, we're actually a much smaller demographic on Twitch. I don't know why I said larger. So much smaller demographic on Twitch. So this conversation is so important. Dalya, I wanted to ask you just one more question. So as you've been with WAVA for 17 years, you've seen probably, I hope, so much growth and change. Do you have any words of hope for anyone who's listening who feels maybe in a place of hopelessness right now?
Yeah. One of the things that has been the most useful, one of my mantras over the years is sexual assault is an isolating experience, but it's not an isolated one. And
Chills.
like people are not alone. And I know personally that you can feel like you are going down a rabbit hole when something has happened to you, and it is so hard to kind of fly above yourself and see that this is like part of a web of something much larger than your personal experience. But just know, I always say, like, it's a chapter in our book. It's not the title of our book. And we just need to be able to make connections to community and to people that will hold us in really hard times and also celebrate us in the ways that we're able to show up and to continue to thrive in our world. And it's
beautiful. That was amazing. I feel geez, I'm gonna cry. That was so beautiful. And I think that's probably one of the most important things, is that it's not the name of your book, it's just a chapter. It's a subset of a small little piece of your story, and you have so much more story to tell, and don't let that define you. It's not a defining moment in any way. And I think that's absolutely beautiful. But there was one last question that I think might be really helpful even for a Friday seminar. Does Wava have a short sheet of briefing that people can distribute that says what to watch out for, things that are red flags in the digital spaces? That could be, an amazing thing that we could cultivate on Friday even, like what are the do's and don'ts. But I just want to ask, do you guys have anything like that kind of?
There is a woman here in BC who does a ton of work on this, and I'm sure that we have something like that kicking around that could be the jump off point for a deeper dive with everyone. Yeah.
I think that'd be great, because I think guidelines in the digital spaces is so helpful, because if you set them up and you say, this is written black and white, here we go, then it becomes much less, the lines become less blurred. And I think that's what we need to do as a society, right? The lines of everything needs to become less blurred. People need to understand that, no means no, right, and there's no variation. As I like to say in here, no is a full sentence.
Yes.
That you can just say no. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Dalya, I want to say thank you so much for your time and your words. I am beyond honored to share this space with someone as incredible, as kind, as well-spoken. I feel like you gave me chills about 1,000 times. And thank you for being a part, the executive director. I mean, you are the captain of this boat, of Wava, and the 17 years of good. I can't wait personally to watch, hopefully hundreds of years. Well, I don't know if I'll watch hundreds, but not immortal, but I hope to watch decades more of Wava saving people, helping people. And thank you, Dalya. This is Dalya Israel of Wava. Thank you so much. So grateful. Thank you. This was an episode of Coven Conversations. I'm Poopwa Jax. This was Dalya Israel of Wava, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much, Dalya. Thank you.